what I'm covering today is maintenance of cycle infrastructure. And it is an important area for cycle infrastructure, probably overlooked mostly when we do these projects, but it is very important as rough surfaces, little faults in cycle infrastructure can be actually a hazard to cyclists. Cyclists are cycling along on pretty narrow tires and they're balancing. So small little imperfections cause problems. Having to avoid issues also cause problems. And under the Roads Traffic Act 1993, public bodies are responsible for maintaining public roads. And that includes cycleways and cycle tracks as they're defined as public roads under the Act. So something to be aware of when we're looking at these things. The first thing I'm going to do is implementation, because maintenance, you really need to be thinking about maintenance when you're starting a project. Projects need significant maintenance from day one, and building the project properly first time will reduce maintenance. Poorly built infrastructure will require significantly more maintenance. So starting at your foundation, we need to make sure that the foundation for the cycle tracks are of a high standard. If we have poor ground conditions, we need to be using the geotextiles, things like that, to make sure that we have a strong foundation base. While they're designed for cyclists and only cyclists, they will still need maintenance vehicles running along. So there is some advice in terms of the standard axles that would be used on both the cycle design manual and the TII have guidance on that as well. And they are quite important, because if you put in a poor foundation and you're running maintenance vehicles along it on a regular basis, it could deteriorate quite quickly. So the most important, get the foundation right day one. Next thing to look at is trees. Just by its nature, we will be running next to trees, or we will be putting in trees afterwards to green the roots. Sorry, roots, that's probably the wrong word to use there. But tree roots tend to end up inside in pavements if the wrong variety of tree is located next to the cycle track, and we need to consider that. So when developing the schemes, talk to the landscape architects, get them to specify trees that have limited impact. If we do know that the roots are going to be an issue from a particular tree, consider putting in root guards along next to the cycle track to prevent what's shown there in the image, which does cause cyclists to fall off their bikes or pedestrians to trip. And it's a constant problem around our cities at the moment. And then where we're running next to existing trees, ideally, we do not want to be cutting down or damaging trees. So we need to work our way around these. And in that case, we look at putting in a geocell above the tree roots to protect those trees for the long term. And this has been done on a few cycle schemes now. This example here is the Blackrock Coastal Mobility Route, where the geogrid was put next to quite a mature tree. And when you're cycling along there, you wouldn't even know there was a different foundation underneath it. So this is something to consider when we're developing up the schemes. Next thing to consider is drainage. Bicycles are not designed for running in wet weather to a certain extent. They have relatively slick bicycle tires. Even when they do have grooves, they're not really designed the same way as car tires to push the water away. They have a braking system that's probably hasn't really changed for most bikes in a long, long time. The rim brakes, while they're great, they're not as efficient in wet weather. So you need to consider how we drain these cycle infrastructure well, so that we reduce the potential problems in wet weather. And we live in Ireland, we get a lot of wet weather, so it is important. Another aspect is where you have a lot of water staying on a cycle track, just like the photograph up there, which was taken in the last few weeks. Cyclists will tend to avoid it, and that might put them in risk with other vehicles. They'll avoid it because they can't see what's underneath the water. And if the bicycle hits a pothole or grate or something like that, it can actually do quite a lot of damage. And then in the old style drainage infrastructure, the drainage gullies were often big enough or wrongly orientated to actually able to take a bicycle wheel. and that's something to avoid. So what we want to consider when we're doing the schemes is now put in gullies that are cycle friendly. So they're flat at the top, they don't have indentations, and they have the ribs in both directions to make sure the cyclists can't, or cycle wheels can't go in it. This is a scheme in Castletimon Road in the South Dublin County Council area, and you can see it's brand new, it's only been built at the moment. And you can see, well, just about see the drainage cutouts in the protection curb to allow the water to go out. In this section, they've used the gully to catch the water, and in some sections, the verge may be used to catch the water. So you can see the drainage has been really considered in this scheme, and that is what we expect now going forward. On cycle schemes, they need to be considered as much as road schemes. Here's another option when you're doing drainage, and that's the beanie block or a drainage channel that runs along next to the cycle track and takes the water in, and you don't have any ironwork in the cycle track, which is of a benefit. In the second image, it's similar setup, but this time the drainage or the drainage curb is taking the water from the bus lane, and the cyclists or the cycle lane is draining through channel or curb openings out into the cycle track or into the bus lane. The bus not providing ironwork in bus lanes is quite important because on a 3-meter bus lane, the wheels of the bus will be running over the gully quite often, and they get damaged very, very quickly. However, there's one significant disadvantage with beanie blocks. They tend to get blocked up, and it's important that they're maintained, and they're not easy to maintain. So it's something that you need to be aware of when you're building these schemes. This is beanie blocks on a cycle scheme in Ireland, and you can see how blocked up it is. Other options when we're building up the schemes is the sides is something we want to promote, and Mick will cover it later on, but it does bring up maintenance issues. So it's something to consider when you're putting in the schemes. This is a new scheme built in the last year in Ireland, and you can see there's quite a lot of weeds. The surface material used probably wasn't ideal. The plants didn't cover the area enough, and weeds have started to dominate a little bit. The landscape architect and the drainage person need to work together to find the right substrate for that minimizes weeds growing, and the right plants to cover the area as much as possible. Next one is pavement. Cyclists like cycling on level pavement. You pick up every imperfection on a cycle lane, and all of you who know who cycle a lot will know you literally pick up pains in the proverbial when you run along cycle lanes that are rough. This is a new cycle lane that was built this year, and you can just about see it's quite rough even in that photograph. Your bike definitely picks it up. That's now been replaced as part of the construction project, as part of the snagging, with a new surface which has been machine laid. We need to make sure our schemes are machine laid as much as possible. That needs to be taken into account in terms of the width, the angles and stuff like that, so that the machines can go around these radiuses quite easily. One of the problems with the previous one is there was a few tight sections and difficulties around bus stops, which meant it ended up being hand laid. So we need to consider that as part of our detailed design and construction, so that we end up with a really nice level surface to cycle along. And the difference, for those of you who know the scheme I showed there earlier, the difference between what was there before and what's there now is very significant. Next thing is pavement color. I know there's real concerns about pavement color in terms of maintenance, but the strengths of having the red color are really, really strong in terms of legibility, attractiveness, and safety at junctions, that it is worth dealing with. And I think as we provide more red surfacing, the availability of the red surfacing will become more available from the contractors, so that we can get over it. But in terms of, even the Dutch don't really worry if the color match isn't great. I can put photographs up here showing black as well. It's more important overall to have the red coloring as far as we're concerned. And if we do end up with a patchwork quilt to a certain extent for a while, that's fine. And over time, it'll get replaced again. But we should aim to try and provide the red as much as possible. Here's another example of red put in September along the Dodder in the South Dublin County Council area, and you can see the significant difference that it highlights between the cycle lane and the footway. And this is based on the new specification, so it has the smaller stones, so it's really level and smooth for cyclists to travel along. And you can see quite a strong color with the mix. We've also, on this one, we're trialing forgiving curbs, which you can just about see here, which we'll be working on over the next while. So then we have our high quality infrastructure built properly in the first place, and then we start looking at maintenance. What we need to do is add the active travel infrastructure into our maintenance plans for our transportation network. So the routine, reactive, regulatory, and seasonal maintenance all need to be added into your plans for the local authorities to maintain the infrastructure. One of the things that turns up quite a lot is it's difficult to get to the gullies, to clean the gullies. It might require changes to SOPs, standard operating procedures, for the drainage cleaning crews, but it is something that we need to look at, because these infrastructure do need to be cleaned as they were in the past. And as you have less traffic running near the curb, you end up with more dirt in there. And in autumn, it can be a real challenge. Dublin City did a great job keeping the Griffith Avenue cycle lane open over the last few years during the autumn. But it required significant workload. This is about 2 years ago, I think, that they were having to go out and sweep it and use the vacuums to clean up the cycle track. But it was a challenge. But it is something that, if we're putting in this infrastructure, we will need to do. And you can see from this photograph, the techniques they're using are changing, using different equipment. I saw a tweet from last week from Dublin City Council showing that there were power hosing sections to get the leaves out. So there's a lot of learning going on in this area at the moment. But the autumn is probably the most challenging period for keeping cycle infrastructure clear. It's also one of the most popular times of the year to cycle, as it's not too hot and it's not too cold yet. So you do get a lot of cyclists this time of the year. There are machines that have been built that are available that will fit within the cycle lanes that we design. If you're designing them within the criteria, the cycle design manual, it was one of the criteria used to set the minimum standards. And these, there's one company even makes these in Ireland. So it's good to know. Other things that we need to consider sweeping up along the way, when we add the epoxy resin material, colored material on a cycle lane, it does get swept straight away after the contractor has put it down. But it needs to be done a few times, because this material here was done in August, and it's still quite loose. And this is quite hazardous at junctions for cyclists, because they will skid on that material if you're not careful. So you do need to go back in a few times before all the material is removed. And glass is something that really doesn't bother car drivers, but it's a problem for cyclists and needs to be picked up. When you do have little debris like this on the road, you will end up with cyclists doing erratic movements, which sometimes puts them into conflict with motor vehicles, and something to be aware of. So we do need systems that pick up these issues regularly and gets them cleaned rapidly. Trees overgrowing on cycle tracks is something that happens in loads of locations. When you don't pull this material back, the effective width of the cycle track reduces, or you end up with the cyclist running on the footpath, which never goes down too well. This is okay this time of the year. Well, not okay, but it's visible this time of the year. In another few weeks, when all the leaves are gone, those twigs are going to be hazards for minor injuries, but they are a hazard for cyclists in a few weeks when they're not visible at night. And the same with height. You can just about see it here, but the height of the tree sticking out over the cycle track is below the height of a cyclist. The cyclist ends up going around it rather than going underneath it. So something that needs to be picked up on an infrastructure. And over the last few years, we've put in loads of rapid build infrastructure, and it needs maintenance. This is a scheme that's been in place a couple of years now, and you can see that the rubber curbs have moved. You can just about see the screws are left in the ground, which could be a hazard to other vehicles running over them. They need to be inspected fairly often and reattached to the ground as necessary. I have seen these ones in particular across the cycle track as well, which they may not be that visible at night, so it could be a hazard. And then at the start of these rapid build schemes, you end up with a bollard that's almost a sacrificial lamb to the rest of the scheme. They constantly get hit. They're there for a reason. They're there to highlight it. So it is important that we pick them up again. And some of them get damaged on the other end of the scheme as well. But something to pick up on. Manholes and old potholes and things like that need to be filled pretty often, as cyclists could end up doing quite a lot of damage to their bike if they were to hit this full on. Generally, cyclists are keeping an eye out for this, but they will miss it every now and again. And when they're keeping an eye out of it, they will do an erratic movement to go around it, which might catch some drivers unawares. When we're repairing roads, it's often put in a bit of delay set and you tamp it down and it's a bit rough, but the car will smooth it out over time. That doesn't really work in cycle tracks, so we need to come up with systems for the repairs within cycle tracks that give you a much more level surface. Or maybe do we have to start looking at if a utility comes through a cycle track, that they recover the whole cycle track and the section they've worked on. But it is something that is a challenge we need to keep an eye out for, because this type of repair doesn't really work for cyclists, as the unevenness results in hazardous conditions for cyclists. And signs and lines will have to be upgraded over time or reapplied over time. Something to be aware of. And then we come to winter. This is an area that I think we really need to consider as the network rolls out. In the urban areas, particularly Dublin, we do have a lot of cyclists during winter. It does reduce from the summer, but it doesn't reduce as much as you might expect. There is a lot of hardy cyclists that will keep cycling all year. So we need to develop plans or consider which routes need to be swept and de-iced over winter. It's not a matter of going out and doing all, but some may need to be prioritized and considered. And there is some countries that actually focus on the cycle track first and in the road because the hazard is so much for the cyclists. Finally, circular economy, not something that we give enough attention to as designers at the moment in terms of active travel infrastructure, but it is something we want to see going forward. We want to see designers coming in with suggestions on how the infrastructure can be made greener in terms of the construction. For example, recycled asphalt product, RAP, can we use it more? We're allowing up to 15% in the wearing course now of cycle off-road or segregated cycle infrastructure. We would like to see push that up. Maybe we should do some trials on that. I know we're speaking to a local authority and a supplier in the next couple of weeks about using tires, recycled tires within the wearing course. We're open to talking about these and considering these over the next while. In addition, the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment has formed a cement and construction sector decarbonisation working group, which is going to present a report to government in the next couple of weeks, which will require changes to the decarbonisation of the cement being used on our infrastructure. And it's something the designers need to be aware of, because that will have an impact on what we specify. And it'll be the contractors will also need to be aware of it. And finally, it will also require that we do some carbon calculations for our schemes. So the NTA is developing a carbon calculator for active travel schemes, more of a simpler carbon calculator, which hopefully will be out by Christmas and that you will be able to use next year, which will be a requirement coming out of that plan from the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Cycle parking, go. For cycle parking, it's the same core principles that we use for other types of infrastructure. And cycle parking is a type of infrastructure that we can really get the benefits from. We know how hard it is to change streets. We've all been part of those schemes. It's very difficult to change priority from motorized private vehicles to active travel, be that changing parking, taking traffic lanes, changing junctions. We've all been there. It's hard. Cycle parking is one of the easier wins in our toolkit. So it definitely, but throughout this presentation, think about what you can do. Yes, it costs a bit of money. Yes, it costs a bit of space. But in terms of in relation to other infrastructure, it's much easier to get in, and it really does pay dividends. So we're looking for the cycle parking to be safe. So it's secure for the cycle and it's secure for people locking their bikes. So risk secure in safe areas, lowering the risk of personal crime. It's closest practical to the final destination. Doesn't have to be right outside the door, but it's got to be near enough to make it usable. It's got to be connected to routes and buildings, easy to find. It's got to be in good quality design, i.e. usable and well maintained. Nobody likes to park their bikes beside places that have been used for as smoking shelters, or where abandoned bikes are, etc. And comfortable and easy to use, accessible to all, and that's becoming more and more important. There's different types, as Joe has talked about in the introduction. There's a lot of different types of bikes out there, and that's what we're designing for. We are designing for future years, so we got to think about the different types of bikes. So in terms of locating on street short stay parking, convenience, close to destination, that it's secure, that there's some natural surveillance, that it's not obscured, and that there's lighting. I was parking my bike in Dublin, North Dublin city centre yesterday, and there's been a fantastic programme of street trees being put in some of the streets, but the cycle parking was between the trees, and I felt unsafe. I thought, I was very much blocked. Nobody could see me. So it's that kind of thing. Safety, don't block pedestrian desire lines or reduce footpath width to substandard. Ideally, we've a lot of road space out there, guys. We can you can get 10 bikes in for 8 to 10 bikes in one car parking space. And that's really maybe where we should be focused on putting our cycle parking, and think about minimizing the risk of people, the bikes being hit by reversing vehicles, etc., or people that are locking or unlocking their bikes. It's the golden rule. Would you park your bike there? And we've lots of information on dimensions, on clearances. I won't bore you reading through tables. Nobody wants that, but it's all there in the manual. So do look. In terms of, as I was saying, increased accessibility, we're looking for 1 space per 20 for larger non-standard bikes, so that they can be used by disabled people with adapted bikes, or other people using tandems, child trailers, cargo bikes and tricycles. Just to say, keep the blue for the disabled bikes. That's an international standard for disabled parking. And spaces for disabled cycles should be provided in the most accessible locations. So you can see here, this photo is from Trinity College, and there's a ramp there for users. But there aren't those kind of 1 in 20. Is that too much? There aren't those kind of bikes in Ireland. I took this photo yesterday in Rampmines. You can see there's probably about 20 bikes parked there, and 3 cargo bikes that don't have anywhere to park, but are locked to themselves, hopefully with good locks. In certain parts of Dublin, we have seen an absolute explosion in cargo bikes in the last year, I'd say. So you may not have experienced that yourselves on streets. I know we're talking to the whole country, but generally, those kind of trends spread out. So we really do need to be thinking about bike parking for different types of bikes. Increase in terms of accessibility as well. Cycle parking should never inconvenience others. And a tapping rail, this is kind of new in the manual, so be aware. A tapping rail should be, this rail that's detectable with a cane should be at the bottom half of an end stand in a row of stands. And retro-reflective material can help those blind or partially sighted to detect signs. And in fairness, the rail can also be useful for connecting larger bikes like cargo bikes, or smaller bikes like kids' bikes. In terms of location, this is an area I know there was a good row of shops here in Drimna in Dublin 12. These cycle parking spaces were put in a number of years ago. They're just that bit too far away from the destinations, really. I've never ever seen a bike parked there. But in fairness, the council came along a couple of years later and put cycle parking right outside the shop. I didn't get to, there's always a lot of bikes using it. This is from Google, and I just didn't get out to take the photo at the right time. But you can see when we are more and more building bus stop borders. Guidance on bus stops, as you know, we're in urban areas, we're not looking for laybys. they're problematic for bus operations. It's really hard to both get in and out of them. There's nothing wrong with a bus stopping in an urban area in a street to load and unload passengers. So where we've more of these bus borders, there's a good opportunity to co-locate cycle parking beside them, and it stops people having parking where that might impede bus access. So on street, it's really important to keep the kind of cycle parking simple. It's hard. It's the Sheffield stand is king, really, because what's important with locking your bike is a 2-point locking system, so that you can lock both the wheels and the frame. So having locked both the wheels and the frame, that there's enough stability that your bike can stand up. And guys, not every bike has a crossbar at the top. A lot of bikes, not just ladies' bikes, don't have that crossbar. So think about that when you're locking. The manual does show the A shape, which is what we saw with the tapping rail, and an M shape, which is kind of like a wave. They can offer support. They can offer the 2-point locking systems, and they can give options for smaller, like children's bikes. I would say with the M shape, sometimes people use them wrong, so be careful of where you use them. They use them perpendicular rather than like the Sheffield stand, that you lock your bike parallel, and that's the way they should be used. Don't use fixings when you're putting the stands in. Please don't use fixings that can be easily removed with hand tools. So ensure you're using, if they aren't embedded in concrete and you are using nuts, that it's tamper-proof nuts or chemical anchors. There's a video going around Twitter just recently of cycle parking put in retention sockets, but either the sleeve wasn't in or the retention socket wasn't secured. You can just easily lift out the cycle parking, and that's on one of our local authorities. So just make sure that that it's safe. In terms of functionality, these were called wheel grabbers. They're not appropriate anywhere, really. Maybe if you buy it yourself for your own shed, that's probably the limit of the use on them. They're not appropriate in private locations or public locations, because you can only lock your wheel, and B, they tend to be wheel bucklers. Whenever I've seen these, I've seen bikes abandoned in them because the wheels have been buckled. These ones can look very architecturally pleasing, but in general, whenever I've seen these, the locks have fallen down, the bikes are on the ground, etc. I've seen heart-shaped ones, I've seen circular ones. You know, again, it's the, can you lock both wheels and your bike and your frame to the stand, and does it provide that stability? There are other options that they read for cycle parking mentioned in the manual. Really, these aren't for on street, really. They're for railway stations or commercial developments, campuses, that sort of stuff. UCD have these 2-tier cycle racks. They do provide in general about a third more cycle parking capacity. They're not for heavy bikes or all users, although what happens is you pull these out and it comes down on a slope and you can wheel your bike into the tray and push it up again. And generally they are pneumatically assisted, but they're still not for everyone. As you can see, they're not, the lower racks are much more popular. But they have a place, and there are cycle lockers as well. Generally they're private company operating them. They're annual rental. It's one per person. In general, these ones are vertical, so they're more for standard bikes than the non-standard or heavier e-bikes. I have seen lockers that are pay per use, but just for some reason they haven't been, whatever way the models worked, it hasn't been successful. The cycle hangers, these are other options for on-street cycle parking where there's limited front gardens, or people have to bring their bikes through either their doorways or in apartment blocks. Ideally, all apartment blocks would have their cycle parking conditioned, but if there's older areas, then these can work well. Generally, it's leased. Space in the cycle locker is leased to individuals from the local authority. They're broadly similar in size to a standard car parking space, but there's a bit of overhang. And in the manual, I didn't go through dimensions with you. As I said, I'm not going to bore you with numbers, but there's a handy summary in the manual, which you can look at. And there are, in terms of secure cycle compounds and hubs, a lot of you will have been on the Dutch bike study trips and seen the amazing cycle parking and various railway stations, including the multi-story in Utrecht. This is one from Dublin. This is our Drury Street cycle parking. So these kind of hubs can be provided in town centres as well as at large public transport interchanges. So this one is, yeah, it's co-located with car parking facility, and there's different types of services can be available there. In this one, there's cycle repair stands, etc. But in other places, there may be cycle hire, or it could be a hub for cycle freight businesses, and some have changing rooms and showers. And here's the mega one in Utrecht. This is 6 or 7 stories of this type of cycle parking. So yeah, when we get to this, we'll be delighted. Think about temporary cycle parking for events as well. Joe took this photo at Bloom during the summer. That's a festival in the Phoenix Park where temporary cycle parking was obviously conditioned, and it's really well used. It also, temporary cycle parking might show you where, where there may be demand before you put in permanent cycle parking. This one in Bloom, they actually used a scaffold pole structure. So, but I think they're available for rent and stuff. So think about that in terms of, I know there are a lot of planners on the call. So in terms of applications for licenses and stuff, cycle parking can have a big impact. And for our bike share schemes, which are growing in different parts of the country, which are great, and they're a welcome addition to the offer for cyclists. When it gets to this stage, when it's so popular like that, is there much public parking left? We might have to think about specific cycle parking for the bike share schemes, or this is what Bolt do, or Sligo County Council do with Bolt in their area. It's marked out green. Sometimes they have Sheffield stands, sometimes they don't. You have to put your bike in that green area. It's geocached. Other than that, you get a €6 fine. So that's a kind of simple, low cost solution. Think about, again, managing abandoned bikes, because it's not just that you won't want to park your bike beside abandoned bikes or whatever, but it's unsightly. Our streets are precious public places. So yeah, think about a system for that. Generally the bikes are tagged, and if the tag isn't removed in 2 weeks, the bike is removed, stored for a while, and then either recycled or donated to a bicycle repair scheme, of which there are many. I know there's been a good few set up lately. I'm going to give you just a bit of a case study of University College Dublin. University College Dublin is about 6 kilometres outside the city centre in a suburban location. It's a huge third level institute. It's got 27,000 students and 4,000 staff. There's 3,400 car parking spaces currently at Belfield. That's the campus. And there are 4,800 cycle parking spaces. So we have in Ireland a place where there is more cycle parking than car parking. That all went in fairly recently. Like, it was a big jump in the last couple of years, where we were happy to help UCD put in a lot of cycle parking. It's dotted all around campus, so it's convenient. Convenient to destinations. There's various covered and uncovered facilities. There is a locked compound for those who really want to make sure that they're secure. It's in one place. They've showers and lockers available. So this is one of the photos of all of the types of cycle parking out there. And just to say, yeah, we see the cargo bikes, we see the bikes with the kids, bringing kids in. The secure parking compound you can use by applying, and it's for free. And there's cycle repair stations. There's these lockers, which is really important to specify that they're multi-use, that it's not just a key-based one. These are as a code-based one, and they're cleaned out at night. But it means everyone can use, they're always there's always something available to use. If you've lockers with keys, people move off. We have it in the NTA upstairs. Most of the lockers are unavailable as people have left and forgot to drop the keys, etc. And just this, the UCD, before they kind of went on this journey with us, had plans to develop a 5-story car park. 2 of them, I think. It was costed 15 years ago at 12.5 million, but it was actually much more than that. And they scrapped that. Since 2013, UCD's travel plans have emphasised sustainable commuting to college and reducing the number of car journeys. So it saved them an awful lot of money investing in that, in sustainable transport, including all the cycle parking, which is a tiny fraction of what they would have been paying, even an annual maintenance for their car park. And the impact to secure cycle parking, 46% of residents think that, from our walking and cycling surveys, think that secure cycle parking near or at or near the home would help them cycle more. So it's really important to get it right at the planning stage. And 1 in 6 people who have their bicycle stolen give up cycling. We all know how hard it is, how hard we're all working to improve the cycling offer and cycling infrastructure on streets. We definitely want to keep those who are cycling. So it's really important to put in good cycle parking facilities. We don't have standards in the National Cycle Manual at the moment, but what we would say is that Dublin City Council have very good, obviously national guidelines for new apartments say that it's 1 space per bedroom, and that's Dublin City Council have very good rates for all of the other types of uses, where they talk about not just the quantity but the type of cycle parking and destination facilities such as sharers, drying rooms, multi-use lockers, etc. The people who wrote these obviously cycle, so it's really, look to that as best practice. And just finishing up now with some encouraging news. We've been working with Green Schools and Safe Routes to School, providing cycle parking at schools. We funded 12,600 cycle parking spaces in the last 2.5 years at 731 schools. Considering there's about 4,000 schools in Ireland, that's a huge chunk of the schools, and that means, it includes installation. So we're not just giving the cycle parking to the schools. The contractor goes in, installs it. A lot of it has shelters, and whenever we put cycle parking in, the bikes have appeared. It's been a really good program. We'll leave you with this video. It's more of a public service announcement, but considering there are about 800 people on this call and a lot of them might be new to cycling again after a couple of years, it's good to, and I learned a lot actually from this. So I'm just going to play a few minutes, this Dublin Cycle Campaign video. It's very interesting.
I've been a bike mechanic for the last 3 years. Last year or so, definitely noticed an increase in people coming into me with bicycles stolen. That's down to more bikes on the road, which is great. More bicycles, unfortunately, means more thieves knocking around. An awful lot of new cyclists means that people may not be used to locking the bicycle in town. You may not know the simple rules that you can follow to try and keep your bicycle safe. So they'd be what type of lock you use, where you lock your bike, and how you lock your bike. The main consideration would be what type of lock you get. A cheaper lock will more likely be of poor material, and a thief will know the difference with a cheaper lock. And there is a general rule of thumb that you should be spending 10% of the value of your bicycle on the lock. A good benchmark for that would be €50. €50 will get you a good U-lock. It also has a cord on it, so you can lock one end of the bicycle to the pole and the rest of the cord will go around the bicycle. A good visual deterrent, 2 types of lock in one. It's a very good lock. Another one would be a heavy chain lock, very difficult to get through. Also visually it looks very heavy and chunky. Very important to find an appropriate place to lock your bicycle. In town, you should try and find one of these designated bike stands. Very safe, very secure, off the main road, off the pavement as well. You should also make sure your bicycle is locked at home, if you have it in the shed, in work, if you can take it inside in work, if you live in an apartment block, underground car park, the hallway. Really important to make sure it's locked in these places. The best way to lock your bike, if you're using one of these G-locks or U-locks, it's very important to get the back wheel, the frame and the pole all together. So if you have a look at this, there's our pole, frame, back wheel's in there, and there you go. That's pretty secure. If you have your second chain lock, use that for the front wheel. In this case we have our extra length of cable. You can use this for the front. So this comes down here for the front wheel. Feel like that. Sort of sew it through that way. Back to the U-lock. Slide it in. Make sure it's nice and secure. Locked at the back wheel and the frame, pretty good, all right. Would have been better to have the front wheel locked as well. Wow, set of handcuffs. Fair right. I think that says everything in itself. A brutal lock that could be snipped with a cable cutters. It's a nice bike, but again, this lock is really flimsy. I think it's one of the cheapest locks on the market at the minute, and where it's locked as well, loads of purchase just to bang that with a hammer and it'll come off, you know. Combination lock. So, two really bad locks doing absolutely nothing. For these type of poles, it would have been as well off to get through the main body of the pole and not necessarily on the outer loop of it. So, quick release pin here, that means the seat post after being stolen, it's gone. As well as the hassle, it could cost you up to 50 quid to replace a seat post and the saddle. If you were to take that front wheel off, just break the mudguard and get rid of that cable, and you'll be able to slide the whole bike off. Here we have a good lock and a cable lock. It's absolutely beyond me why the back wheel isn't in that as well. Drury Street car park, there's space in there for, I think it's up to 80 bicycles, secure parking and out of the elements as well.
So yeah, that's like this was made about 10 years ago, by the way. That 50 quid rule of thumb is about 100 euros now, but the best you can, yeah, spend as much as you can on the lock. I learned a lot. I think I was locking my bike the wrong way. I had 3 locks when I go into town, but I wasn't using them correctly. So anyway, a bit of public service announcement there, but it does, when you know what the issues are, you can provide better cycle parking. Okay, thanks so much. That's me.
So we have about a 15-minute presentation here. Just got to give you a bit of an overview of the parallel process, I suppose, that's been going on for the last while now in relation to updating the traffic signs manual and the associated regs. Just before we start, do a bit of name dropping here. We have a fantastic team working on this. So Dan Yates, Sinead Quinn, Cleena Murphy and John Fitzsimons have been instrumental on this in the background, and as well as with the support with the wider international team. So it's a fantastic body of work that the guys have been doing, and hopefully you'll get an idea through this just in terms of some of the intricacies involved in the process. Probably just before we jump into the slides as well, there's a lot happening in this space at the moment across the industry. So if people aren't aware, TII themselves are doing a lot, as well as the NTA here, through the Lens of the Greenway programme. We've the cycle streets, paired shoulder bus lane running, variable speed limits, etc. The NTA themselves, we'll cover off a couple of points on that here today, and the Department of Transport as well. So lots happening. Joe mentioned in previous webinars here about the revised Road Traffic Act as well in terms of the e-scooters, but something that's coming up very shortly is around the consolidation of the principal regulations. So it's the traffic signs and traffic parking regs. So that in its own right is a huge body of work, and they've been well supported by RD as well in that in the background. So yeah, very positive place to be in, and it reflects, I suppose, the positive direction that we're heading as an industry. We're very much at the bottom of the curve here, and in fairness to the cycle design manual, it sort of sets out that journey of where we're heading as an industry. So we would encourage people, as been said on other webinars, to use the feedback system through the email, and collectively we'll bring this forward as an industry to try and move it forward. Okay. So just brief outline agenda here on the screen. So similar to other presentations, this is somewhat very high level in terms of the process, with a bit of an example at the back end of the presentation, just to give people an idea of some of the things that we're thinking about. The department have given an indication that there will be more future information coming on this as well. So people needn't really worry too much about it. It's really just an introduction. Okay. Okay, so just on the manual itself then, so the top note here, so the newer items, I suppose, people will, I suppose, instantly recognize those within the manual itself. And I suppose the message here is we would encourage people to have those discussions early on your projects with your sponsoring authorities, your funding authorities, the NTA, in relation to those items, and work with them in terms of implementation. Timelines are mentioned here as well, I suppose. So 18 to 24 months is what's quoted there, but I suppose it's fair to say we're well underway with a lot of these items. So under production, I suppose the first one off the list, if you like, is going to be RTS 14, which Noel mentioned in last week's webinar, which is the audible zebra signal, the single aspect dual LED signal. So that's due to come out in a number of weeks as part of the consolidation of the regs, and that will go with RPC 001B, so the mini zebra crossings as well. Just in relation to Chapter 4, I suppose there's lots of references to the traffic signs manual itself, and I suppose that's where we pick up from here. Okay, so TSM, most people will be aware of that, I suppose, in the industry. I suppose really just three things here we wanted to pick up. First one, it is derived from ministerial direction, under Section 95 of the Road Act. So the Road Traffic Act, it's not a guidance document, which I've heard over the years, but so it's very important. And I suppose what the underlying objective, if you like, of the TSM is to drive consistency. So consistency in application of our signs, our road markings, our traffic signals. And I suppose you might ask yourself, why do we need consistency? And it's really around legibility for road users. We need to think about it from the end user's perspective here, and consistency is key on that front. So over on the right-hand side, you'll see references to 1997. So it's been a long time since it was 1997, but the two principal regs there. So traffic parking signs regs, 1997, so SI 181, and the traffic and parking regulations, so 182. And since 1997, there's been a number of statutory instruments or addendums, I suppose, if you like, to the principal regs that have been issued as the industry has been updated and progressed. And as you said at the start, the department are now consolidating those regs, so that in its own right is a challenge. Okay, so just looking at the regs then themselves, what's the relationship between the signs regulations and the traffic and parking regulations and TSM? So just an example here on SI 331 of 2012 and 332 of 2012. So that's the cover page, if you like, of the traffic and signs amendments and the traffic and parking regs. And they all speak to each other. So your signs regs will define the physical characteristics of your signage. So the dimensions, the color, the size, etc. It's all very prescriptive. Which we will recognise very much so in the traffic signs manual. So there's some synergies there that we need to be careful of when we're updating or amending either the manual or the regs. There's definitely some synergies there and continuity between them. The traffic and parking regs, then I suppose they tend to expand on what the function of the sign is and how it's supposed to be implemented. So again, we need to go when we're amending things, we need to go back to the root cause or the root purpose and ask ourselves, why do these signs exist in the first place, or why are we introducing new signs, and transcribe that through the various different documents. I suppose over let's put this over here. So over on the other side, then we have fixed charge offences as well. So the road traffic fixed charge offence notice as well, and there's synergies there between that and the rules of the road. So all of these documents are interlinked. As I said at the start, the team have been fairly well engrossed in these documents, and I'm fully aware of it. So lots of challenges and intricacies, I suppose, between each of them that we need to be aware of. Okay, so just to give an insight on some of the areas that we are looking at. So it's 4 key areas, primarily across chapters 5, 7, and 9 in the TSM. And I suppose within each of the topic items, there's each of the topics, there's that sit underneath each of them. And I suppose as we started, like everything, when we started with these, the number of items under each of the headings grew, and probably rightly so. And yeah, I suppose it's an evolving space. It's in terms of updates and amendments. So maybe just to give a flavour of some of the things we're looking at in each of these headings. So the traffic signals, probably from one end of the spectrum, there's a more straightforward request for clarification, if you like, from the NTA around a specific measurement of a 7-metre outreach on a cantilever pole. So the question there is, why is that 7-metre exist? Can we go beyond it? And what are the implications of amending that, and what do we want that to look like going forward? On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have more sort of complicated new sort of features in terms of flashing amber signals, directional signals for cycles and buses. So a varied ranges within that topic itself. But signs and markings, again, it probably more so in the clarifications piece on that one. Cycle signs and markings, again, is the largest topic area, so you can imagine, through the update of the cycle design manual now. Crossings then is probably the largest area for new things, so elephants, footprints, parallel crossings, zebra crossings, and cycle tracks, the audible signals that we talked about. So a varied and sort of wide range of topics here that we're looking at, and it's not just new things, it's sometimes looking at things that we have done in the past as well, and it's really just asking the question as to can we do this better. Okay. Right, so just a bit on the process. So we've established this process to work with the NTA and the department, and a couple of stakeholders as well, to try and provide a bit of governance, I suppose, through the update cycle. So 4-stage process with 2 key milestones to keep us right along the way. So our AIP of concept really is where we set out our stall and really ask the key questions of what we want to amend, where we want to amend it, and take things forward across the traffic signs manual, the regs, and if there's any impacts on other documents as well. So 4 stages, and ultimately we end up with passing the information on to the legal drafting team in the department as well. So once the instructions are passed to them, that gets the end of the process. We'll just look at a little bit more detail here, just give people a flavour of what's happening at each of these stages. Okay, so problem statement, definition, research. So that's really where we're going back to the root cause, and we'll do an example at the end here just to give people a flavour of some of the things that we're thinking about. So traffic signs manual, when we're taking a particular item, we look at what the current manual says. What does it mean? What's the sort of the intended purpose of the sign or the road marking or the traffic signal? How does the legislation tie into that between the signs regs and the traffic and parking regs? Is there any knock-on impacts in the fixed charge notices? New programs are being implemented across the country. There's new demands, there's new sort of approaches. We're making our junctions work a lot harder nowadays as well with these new junction types. So we need to be conscious of what we're trying to get in the future, what our junctions are going to look like. Looking into national case studies as well, and understanding the rationale is really key. As we start to sort of set that information out, we then sort of workshop through various different approaches. So keeping an eye on the Vienna Signs Convention, as I said before, international examples and safety is key. And then we start to sort of map out the early stages of the amendments to the TSM and the legislation as well. So once we're in that position, we agree generally with the department and the NTA how we want to take the next steps, and those next steps are largely in the weeds. So it's important that we set out our principles at this stage, so that we can always come back to the principles of what we're amending, so that we don't get lost in the weeds, so to speak. So lots of text, amended text, removed text, new text, context. So it's context is an important one if we're introducing new text within a certain aspect of either TSM or the regulations. It needs to be consistent in how the rest of the document is drafted, so consistent terminology, etc., and application. So it's quite important. And graphics are obviously important as well. So once that process comes through the other side, we effectively have our second milestone, if you like, or our gatepost that sort of says we're at the finish line, and it gets passed to the legal drafting team, so for final processing. Okay, so very quickly, just to give an example snapshot here, really, this was one of the items that came in, and hopefully all designers are familiar with this. And in fairness, now that we have the cycle design manual, there's some fantastic graphics in there around what sort of end solution should look like. So this is a typical example here, I suppose, where a question would have came in and asked why are designers, or why is this being implemented, or a cycle track end sign has been put on, been designed either side of a side road in a junction. So is there something in TSM that's leading some people to that? Is it a potential sort of industry awareness piece that we need to promote? And do people truly understand what RUS 009 actually represents? So it's back to the basics. What's the root cause, and trying to really for the benefit of our streets. So we're trying to minimize clutter. It's also about purpose, etc. So questions we need to ask ourselves in this type of a scenario, a hypothetical: do we need to amend Chapter 5 or Chapter 7, the regs, and is there a potential trigger in terms of updates to the signs regs, traffic and parking regs, and the fixed charge offences? I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but just to give people a flavour. So most people will be familiar with Chapter 5 in terms of what it looks like. It's obviously regulatory signs. Chapter 7 is road markings. Maybe not too many people have been unfortunate enough to be buried in the regs. And I suppose the main takeaway here is that they're very, very detailed, and there's consistency between the regs and the traffic signs manual is key. The type of information that's in there is very prescriptive in terms of the size, the color, the appearance, etc. So there's synergies between them. So we need to make sure, if we're breaking any amendments in that we have consistency between the documents as well. And as I said before, really what we have to look at in this particular instance, I suppose people are focusing on potentially just a paragraph in isolation with the end plate, and I suppose the manuals can take you so far, both the cycle design manual and the traffic signs manual. But really, as designers, we need to understand the why in the first place. Why is this sign being put up in the first place? What is its function, and what is it bringing here? So it's important that we get collectively we upskill in this department as we move forward into the implementation phases of the cycle design manual. Last slide here, basically, just to reiterate the point, we need to ask ourselves the why as we go forward. Consistency in application is very important, and as we move into the active travel journey, I suppose, for the period of implementation, we really, the onus is on us as practitioners in the industry to use the feedback system that the NTA have established here through the email, and to benefit the collective, really, in terms of suggesting amendments and moving things forward.
So basically, I'll just provide an overview of an advice note that was published by the NTA back in September, which is an advice note that just will try and encourage both designers and people that implement the active travel schemes to try and introduce greening and nature-based SuDS into the active travel schemes that we're preparing. I suppose in conjunction with the NTA, civic engineers Brady, Shipman Martin and AECOM were asked to prepare a greening advice note with some key objectives. Those being the guidance on how we can introduce greening and SuDS into our new schemes, but also retrofit it into schemes. The advice note will be sort of a well-structured advice note that hopefully promotes and encourages the use of SuDS. It simplifies the decision making for designers. So look, we've looked at different systems that we feel will be easily introduced and adaptable to active travel schemes. And then secondly, just to try and demystify or simplify the language that we have in other engineering guides. And the advice note is not to replace the existing guides that are out there, but it's just to try and help designers and people implementing on active travel schemes. So I'll probably bore a few people who are very familiar with drainage design, but for those who are not overly familiar, I thought it was probably good just to put this slide in regards to what is sustainable urban drainage systems, or SuDS. So traditionally in Ireland, we would have hard engineering drainage solutions. So we would generally collect our rainwater from roads or roofs through gullies or downpipes, and we're very efficient at that. We then convey that to pipes, and then from the pipes we try and get the water to our rivers as quick as we can, or to our streams, or even ditches in some instances. As we can see from the news over the last fortnight or so, these urban drainage systems are now being very challenged with both our urban expansion and also with climate change on top of that. So we're seeing more flooding, we're seeing poor water quality in our rivers, and we're also removing amenity and biodiversity space when we put in hard stand everywhere effectively. So a sustainable drainage system basically means mimicking how nature manages drainage, and nature does do it best. So it manages rainfall close to where it falls, so we'd say at source. It slows conveyance, so it doesn't put it into a pipe effectively and bring it as quick as we can to water courses. It slows it completely down through just overground run through grasses, etc. It also attenuates within our natural floodplains, which when the water is stagnant in our floodplains, it also allows for infiltration and evaporation from surface water, but also through vegetation. So delivering greening and SuDS interventions, I suppose the first thing that I will acknowledge, and I'd say most who try to implement these it is that it's challenging to implement SuDS. Both our industry, local authorities, and even our communities are still learning to adapt to the changing pressures of urbanisation and the introduction of our active travel schemes and just general culture change. So hopefully, if we can utilise very simple and cost-effective techniques in active travel schemes, we'll be able to support in providing climate resilience while also adding amenity value and character to our streets, our towns, our cities. So nature-based SuDS in the public environment is, as we said, just becoming mainstream. So as the more projects we do, the features will change. We will hopefully constantly learn and innovate. And I suppose just don't have a fear of maybe getting one or two wrong, but we will improve. The last thing I'd note there is, remember, any feature, we provide a betterment over the existing condition. And this should provide hopefully confidence to anyone that's proposing and implementing schemes, or also any designers that are designing SuDS for the first time. So the advice note sort of focuses on 5 key SuDS features, or SuDS elements we would call them, and I'll go through these 5 in a bit more detail, and then I'll also just sort of summarize other areas that we did look at, but these are the 5 areas that 5 devices that we feel can be and possibly should be implemented into active travel schemes where we can. The first one, fairly basic, is just above ground planters, and so I have key considerations on the top right. So yes, everybody's familiar with planters. They're tried, they're tested technique. They typically sit, or they're fixed on reallocated carriageway space or on our footpaths or any other permissible space. They're mobile and can be relocated to respond to particular demands of a space over time. So even on the image on the top, on the left there, we we still had challenges with vehicles coming along and using this route, so we had to move these planters around. They can be used to delineate parklets to protect cycle facilities and be used for modal filters. They're easier to replant as well due to their higher nature rather than planting on the ground. And they'll also bring hopefully seasonal life and vitality to these spaces, and also offer a home for insects and small creatures. Just down on the bottom then I have challenges and solutions, which is a direct extract from the advice note. And this is provided for each of the SuDS devices that we talk about. So in terms of challenges, so availability of space. The planters they're flexible and can be designed to fit into a range of spaces. Antisocial behavior. I suppose planters should be and need to be designed so that they can't be manually pushed over. I think we need to try and utilize heavy planting medium as well to try and deter interference with people coming along, and especially at early planting stage, people pulling plants out of planters, etc. We just need to be mindful as well of where we locate the planters, so impact and visibility, so try and keep them away from road edge, or if we're doing curb radii, tightening, junction tightening, again, probably not the location, or if we're thinking of it, we need to think about exactly where they will go. And then maintenance. So planters will require regular maintenance to include plant replacement, potential irrigation in really dry times. We need weeding and debris and litter control. So I have a slide toward the end for maintenance, but maintenance does need to be considered for any SuDS device. So next one then would be, it's fairly simple, is protect if we can and enhance existing green space and deliver new. So considerations. So for me, existing green space should be protected where possible. And this simple strategy will help reduce surface water runoff. Considerations should be made to provide more space when initially appraising options for a project. And this is a lesson that I've had to learn myself, whereby we all want to deliver a good pedestrian facility, cycle facility, active travel facility, but we should also try and include for where we can provide greening and SuDS devices. If we can introduce these, it will contribute positively to biodiversity and our amenity spaces, and hopefully have a beneficial impact on surface water quality and quantity. Just a couple of images there that I've put in on the slide. So the top left, you can see Chancery Place in Dublin in 2017, and you can see it was quite a hard impermeable area. There was planting take place, greening took place, and in 2023, that was an image of what it now looks like. We also have on the right-hand side the Dunne to Carrigtwohill cycleway. So we had the Killahora Road in 2019, and then thereafter the cycleway was installed, but we didn't there wasn't a hard median put in between the cycle facility and the carriageway. This was green and planted, and you can see, I think it's an excellent facility. Challenges and solutions, so not too many. So availability of space, so it's not always going to be possible to protect existing green space or provide new, but we should try and prioritize it if possible. I think I sort of mentioned this a few times, but engaging with landscape architects at an early stage may and will help identify opportunities that myself as a civil engineer may not foresee. Also, protecting existing trees. I think we try and maintain existing trees as best we can. So there is no dig solutions. Joe had slides up earlier of cell web type systems where we can provide hard surfaces within the tree root zone, but without hopefully harming the trees. So then rain gardens. Rain gardens are basically just engineered planting that sits slightly lower than the adjacent ground, generally carriageway or footpath. For fairly basic principles, so rainwater runs off the hard surface to the rain garden. The water filters through the soil and the engineered soil, hopefully, and the drainage layer. Water then will infiltrate into ground. If we don't have infiltration, then we can possibly have to put in a drainage pipe at the bottom of the rain garden and take it away to a surface water system. But any water that is retain, and it will be for the majority of rainfall events, it will evaporate into air from the soil, or as I mentioned earlier, from the plants. Just have a couple of images on screen there of illustrations that are in the advice note, where you can introduce rain gardens if possible. So the top left is rain gardens provided in the existing carriageway. So that could be maybe removing 1 or 2 spaces and providing the rain garden. And you'd be very surprised at the impact the rain garden can have and how it can deal with catchment areas. On the top right then is basically an existing verge, and that's retrofitted to contain a rain garden. And you probably also note then that there's just the curb then just has simple gaps in the curb, hit and miss type curb arrangement to allow the water off the carriageway into the rain garden. On the left, we've got rain gardens could be introduced at build outs, and we've done similar at Rock Road. But just to note that when selecting planting, probably required select low level planting that doesn't grow too high in effect or impact on sightline. On the right hand side then, we've got new cycle track on carriageway with an existing verge. Again, the verge could be retrofitted to have a rain garden, and this also may be incorporated, could be aid with regards to the new buffers that are outlined in the excuse me, in the cycle design manual. There's some key considerations. I'll just very briefly touch on them, but they are covered in more detail in the advice notes. So location and size, rain gardens can be pretty much any shape. So location shouldn't really be an issue, and size, anything again, I think is a betterment. You need to consider if it's infiltration to ground or connection to a surface water drain. We all probably know of infiltration tests in accordance with BRE 365, but there is a basic infiltration test advice provided in the advice note, which I find helpful. We need to consider utilities. Have we got utilities where we're proposing rain gardens? Do we need to divert utilities? Preferably not, and we preferably try and design the rain garden around the utilities. We need to consider the plant types and the engineered soil depth. Again, that's where I'd lean on my landscape architect colleagues. Drainage layers, separation layers, geotextiles, or maybe an impermeable membrane if necessary. Edgings and retention of existing carriageway. So this is important, whereby we need to consider the existing carriageway and not to undermine the existing carriageway and its sub-basis. And then we need to consider just inlets and overflows if we feel overflows are necessary. Just rain gardens contain a couple of real world examples. So one that I really like is Pollerton Road, Green Lane in County Carlow. So previously to this would have been a very hard stand area, but you can see the rain gardens introduced. The top right is Rock Road, where rain gardens have been introduced. And previously, before this would have been a paved impermeable median. So challenges and solutions. So availability of space, as mentioned, rain gardens of any size will have a positive impact, although bigger the better. Topography, probably water runs downhill, so rain gardens should be located where rainwater will drain into them. So this can be straightforwardly achieved generally by most instances placing rain gardens at or around existing road gullies. Existing utilities, I'll just skip over that. I have mentioned preferably not divert and try and design around. And then ground conditions. Have we got infiltration available to us, or do we need to consider an under drain and connection to surface water drain? So bioswales, I've just there put in brackets, basically a rain garden on a slope. So these are more suited to more linear schemes. So basically cycle tracks, cycle lanes, where we can introduce bioswales. They can be applied, generally you can put a valley in the middle of the soil and planting, and these can channel the water to the desired location. To protect against erosion due to faster flows, as mentioned, these can be on long linear and sections, and if you have steep gradients, you can deal with these by just providing a gravel base at the bottom of the channel and introduce some small check dams or weirs, which is what you can see in the images on the bottom there, left image. So that before planting, you can see the check dams. They slow the water, but also what they do is also allow for each compartment to basically do its work with regards to taking the water, holding the water, removing pollutants. I suppose challenges is topography. Bioswales, as I mentioned, similar rain gardens should be located where water can get into them, where there's a slope no greater than 1 in 20. We would recommend incorporate check dams. And then again, ground conditions. Are we able to infiltrate the ground, or do we need to consider under drain? SuDS tree pits, they're constructed to increase our attenuation of surface water by exploiting the natural voids that we have within the tree roots themselves. They will need additional depth to a general, probably rain garden or bioswale. And we'd also need to, because of that depth, we also need to consider just the structural performance of the soils and whether they fall into the structural zone of influence of the road pavement. And if so, then tree pits can be constructed using structural soils, which will support the adjacent road, or possibly we may need to introduce some deep concrete sort of retaining features, which will be installed between the tree pit and the road. But generally, tree pits can in turn prove to be an expensive option. That's not to say we shouldn't try and look at doing them. So availability of space, the ideal soil volume for a tree pit is dependent on its species of tree, and as such, it's often possible to select trees that maybe suit a specific condition. And within the guide, there's a link to the green, blue urban soil volume, which will aid civil engineers or designers similar to myself to understand and sort of develop an initial estimate. But for final estimates, I will be again relying on my landscape architect colleagues. Structural performance, we just need to consider wherever the tree pits are, the adjacent to carriageway or the in the footpath. We just need to consider that. And then root protection. So installing root barrier systems to control the direction of root growth and mitigate the risk of damage to adjacent structures and utilities. So there are other SuDS features also discussed within the advice note, so I'll just touch over them here. So the ones that I've covered in detail are probably the more cost effective. And then these ones here that I'll touch on now are probably ones that are a little bit more expensive, but can be utilised in active travel schemes. So we've got tree pits with a Stockholm system. So these are for incorporating into sort of urban hard landscaping. We got tree pit with proprietary crate systems. So again, excellent for increasing for attenuation. We've also got engineered bioretention systems. So these are rain gardens that are designed with flow controls effectively that can be used for attenuation. And then we've also got permeable paving, reinforced grasses, and permeable asphalt, which I understand is going to be trialled soon in Dublin City Council. So section 4 of the advice note just talks about how to enable SuDS to thrive. It provides guidance and information on what helps and enables SuDS device to thrive and flourish from a planting and landscape point of view. For me, this section just aids me as a designer to better understand the importance of the soil types, the planting, the objectives for the actual device itself, and then planting specifications and typologies. For general scheme designers, this section report, as I said, gives a good insight, but I would again be seeking advice from a qualified landscape architect on just how to select and how to basically get the planting right. Maintenance requirements. So this is pretty much a snap straight out of the advice note. Probably would draw your attention just to the frequency. So I think the most frequent is quarterly, so every 3 months. So SuDS devices generally shouldn't require a lot of maintenance, but they will require some maintenance. So if we're proposing any SuDS device, it needs to be discussed with those who will in turn be taking these areas in charge and ensuring that maintenance can be undertaken and that it will be seen through. Lastly then, community engagement. So the addition of greening and SuDS features to schemes will provide a benefit to our local community, and obviously will give us a more attractive environment. But in some instances, if not in most, retrofitting proposals, we'd be proposing to remove parking spaces, carriageway spaces, cross verge, or could be introducing traffic calming through SuDS devices. I think it's always nearly the initial reaction from the public is hesitation or negativity. So we as designers or people implementing, we need to bring people along on the journey and advise them and teach them on the benefits of greening and the SuDS. And hopefully then they will come along and buy into the scheme with us. So with community support from the outset, it's more likely that the local community will feel a sense of ownership, experience, and this more so from our partners, the civic engineers in the UK. Experience has shown that ownership has led to formal, say, tidy towns or informal community groups being established to look after the SuDS devices or greening, and these groups then will look after and support in the maintenance and the planting, and hopefully will look after the more straightforward sort of weekly, if even weekly, maintenance issues. I think discussion groups, workshops, I think we should be trying to get them and bring people along on the journey with us and listen to them and, take their thoughts and suggestions on board and let them know that they're being heard. And thank you.
Final thing from us. Firstly, thank you for the vast numbers that have turned up and attended these presentations, which really shows the interest in creating cycle infrastructure in Ireland. I would suggest those people who have a bit of time, take a look at this video in how the Dutch got their cycle paths. There's an assumption that it's always been like that. It hasn't. I've been going to the Netherlands for 20 odd years now, and it's changed perceivably in that period. And only in the 20 years before that, it completely changed. So it is something that has evolved over a relatively short time, one generation, and it's worth looking at the issues and things that brought about the change. Some of them I think are applicable in Ireland. And I suppose something that people have asked a few times, what do we want out of the cycle manual? And I think what we want isn't the infrastructure. What we want to see is people using the infrastructure, using these cargo bikes as their family transport around. That's going to be a sign of things that we've been successful. So in 5-10 years time, if we see people, more and more people like this out there, we're doing well. This is a photograph I took at a GA pitch or training last weekend, and you can see a few of these already there. But actually, if you look closely, there's actually a few more in the background. I will admit, I have my back to the car park, which was also full, but it is a good indication of how things are changing. And we want to see these become the main thing and the cars become the minor. I want to see that the bike to school initiative is brilliant, have to say. But I want to see in the next 5 to 10 years the kids going to school on their own and not being as concerned about PPE. We want segregated facilities that their parents feel that they can do that. That's what we want coming out of the cycle manual. We want to see more and more people going to work without being concerned about the clothes they're wearing and stuff like that. That's what we want to see. And we want to see people going to work or doing their business using cargo bikes. We need wider infrastructure to do that. We need to prevent, we don't have access control on the facilities so they can do this. We don't want to force people to do it. We want people to make the choice to do it that they feel they can. We want more older people out on the cycle infrastructure. In the Netherlands, the older people make up a huge proportion of the cyclists, huge proportion. It's actually higher than most of the other age groups. And they cycle as far. It was something that blew me away about 5 years ago when I was walking. I tend to walk when I'm out there. And the amount of older people using the cycle infrastructure was incredible. And finally, we want people like Clara's Cycling Without Age Ireland group out using the facilities. Again, they need wider infrastructure. We want people like Aaron Daly out with his daughter with the infrastructure that facilitates them moving around the place. It's not about the infrastructure, it's about the people who will be using the infrastructure. It's what we want to focus on over the next couple of years. Anyway, that's me. Thank you all for your attention. And we're here to help with that email address, and designers, they can contact us as they do all the time. Okay, thank you very much.